Okay, the matter of the fact is, does the Omicron variant make a case for booster doses? Does the Omicron variant make a case for booster doses? Now we are going to discuss about this thing. Here there are two excerpts who is speaking about this thing. There is a scarce evidence that boosters add value to the main purpose of the immunization program. There is a scarce evidence that boosters add value to the main purpose of the immunization program. In a conversation, around booster shots, to tackle COVID-19 were loud earlier, the emergence of the new variant Omicron has ensured that the clamor for booster shots has reached a fever pitch. The health minister stressed that India's priority is to fully vaccinate all adults and not administer booster shots, even though adequate vaccines are available. He also said that any decision on booster doses will be based solely on scientific recommendations. At a recent meeting, the National Technical Advisory Group on Immunization maintained that it was not recommending a booster dose for any section of the population priority groups included in the absence of evidence. In a conversation moderated by R. Prasad, Chandrakant Laharia, and Satyajit Rath, discuss whether booster doses are required and when and to whom they should first be given when there is enough evidence recommending their use. Edited excerpts: what is the primary objective of booster dose? To prevent symptomatic infections or to prevent moderate or severe disease and death. So Satyajit Rath, first let me raise what I suspect is going to be an elephant in the room during this entire discussion. Are we talking about purpose of vaccination with the outcomes at the community level, or are we talking about the outcomes of vaccine in terms of protection at the individual level? This is going to remain a point during any discussion about booster shots. The evidence so far is that we are far more efficiently protected against severe illness, hospitalization, and death by being fully vaccinated than infection and transmission. The expectation from boosters is that they will proportionately increase protection against infection and transmission. However, the evidence that booster doses to this is fragmentary. Chandrakant Lehari, I would approach this in a different way. We know that boosters are being considered globally for a different set of populations, and when we think of purpose of boosters, and I have to go back to the purpose of the COVID-19 immunization program, the purpose is to reduce hospitalization, severe disease, and death. And now the purpose can be achieved through okay, does not have separate purpose and the severe disease, and now the purpose can be achieved through administering full vaccination. So the booster dose does not have a separate purpose. It is intended to fulfill the overall objective of the COVID-19 vaccination program. We really do not know whether giving booster shots adds any value to the primary purpose of the immunization program. How much do we know about the effectiveness of Covishield and Covaxin in preventing symptomatic infection and severe disease? In the absence of many studies on vaccine effectiveness, what will be the basis on which a decision on booster doses will be taken? We know that there is evidence indicating that while the antibody level goes down over a period of time, protection against severe disease and hospitalization remains unchanged. So unless we change the purpose of the vaccination program, which is to reduce symptomatic disease, the need for booster shot is not going to be altered. SR. In real life, effectiveness studies, while one can debate endless on just how much evidence is enough evidence, I don't have any difficulty in accepting that both Covaxin and Covishield provide a significant measure of protection against severe illness and death. We don't have reliable evidence about protection against infection and transmission and mild or symptomatic disease, but none of that gives us evidence for how to decide about a booster dose. Because if we are looking for protection against hospitalization, we already have a vaccination campaign that in the first place is not complete, and where vaccines have been administered, we have every expectation that they are going to be effective. So I'm not certain of what the evidential or tactical basis for discussing a booster dose inclusion in a vaccination campaign is. India has administered over 1.26 billion doses, and the vaccination program has been going on for about 11 months at this point. Should we not have had just several effectiveness studies looking at different aspects should have helped us decide about booster doses? Yes, certainly. But even if you have data about the effectiveness of two doses of Covishield or Covaxin preventing hospitalization and death, how does that tell us whether boosters will work or not? Even if it turns out that we don't have reasonable protection in real life circumstances against hospitalization and death with two doses of the vaccine, that doesn't automatically tell us that the booster dose is going to work. We need to remember that vaccine effectiveness remains unchanged over a period of time against hospitalization and death. But the bigger point when deciding about booster dose is, where is the cutoff for saying that this much protection is enough and this is what we want to achieve? Because second, how do we decide what level of active benefit or protection we want to achieve through the booster? Finally, do we have data for these vaccines used in India or different vaccines that giving a booster shot will result in improved protection? There is some data that a booster shot of the Pfizer vaccine produces improved protection, but we don't have that kind of data or other vaccines. So all these studies should be done, analyzed, and interpreted in combination with other factors. Only then can a decision be made. Does the emergence of the Omicron variant make it necessary to administer a booster dose? The emergence of the newer variant makes the case for global inclusive primary vaccination program for COVID-19 even more compelling than it was. Does it separately make specific case for booster dose program more compelling? I don't think so. For all the reasons discussed so far, you are going to have little more transmission and hospitalization, but protection against the hospitalization is likely to be higher. For booster doses, evidence of protection is scarce. What Micron does is make the case for primary global inclusive vaccination more compelling rather than specifically increasing the pressure to plan for boosters. We know that the ability of the available vaccines in reducing transmission is limited. We also know that based on available data, Omicron causes mostly mild disease. Currently, licensed vaccines have a proven role in reducing severe disease, hospitalization, and death. So there is definitely a clear disconnect that because of Omicron, there would be any additional advantage in reducing any kind of illness. The focus has to be on ensuring that everyone receives a primary schedule of vaccination. There is no additional value in administering a booster because of the Omicron variant. What do you think should be the first to get booster doses? Immunocompromised people older than 60 years, or those with comorbidities, SR, who really don't have good evidence. For example, there is evidence that booster doses increase more antibody levels, but do they increase antibody levels in specifically immunocompromised individuals who have not responded, who have not responded well, or have not responded for a long duration to the primary vaccine schedule? We don't know. Of course, if we had achieved proper universal primary immunization coverage and if vaccine supplies were available and approved, it would be nice to have boosters available for identified categories of particularly vulnerable people, but no conditionally. The supply of conditionality, the primary vaccination campaigns excess conditionality, or the conditionality of evidence for boosters working in these categories of people are being fulfilled. CL, the need for booster can be assessed based on that pattern of breakthrough infections or which population group over a period of time is reporting more severe disease. These would be also vary according to the type of vaccine used. So we need more granular data of epidemiology, disease burden, and breakthrough infections before we identify age groups. This is also true for vaccine specific data, protection efficacy, effectiveness, and duration of protection. Next, we need to know about the performance of booster doses. We need to know that the vaccines perform when booster doses are given to different sets of population. It is not necessary that the protection will be similar in each age group, but we need to know what the optimal timing after the second dose should be, 6 months, 9 months, or a year. and whether it should be a homologous or heterogeneous booster dose, because the majority of countries are giving booster doses using either a different vaccine belonging to the same platform or vaccines from a different platform. We need to explore whether booster doses should be of the same amount of vaccine or a dose sparing formulation. Another key factor is the duration between the completion of the primary immunization schedule and the planner booster dose. So, by that standard, if you look at the Indian example, of course, health workers and frontline workers who received the vaccine long before anyone else might come in the category of people who should receive a booster dose before other groups. Hi, I'm extremely sorry. Just have got the call, which is not required. Thank you. Another key factor is the duration between the completion of the primary immunization schedule and the planned booster dose. So, by that standard, if you look at the Indian example, of course, health workers and frontline workers who received the vaccine long before anyone else might come in the category of people who should receive a booster dose before other groups. Also, the elderly may require far more boosting. I also want to bring the final and slightly related point, which is relevant. There is an ongoing discussion and a broader consensus that while booster doses require more thinking, an additional dose or third dose as a part of the extended primary immunization schedule for those adults of any age group who are immunocompromised or who could not develop the immune efficient antibody after two sorts of primary schedule should be considered. Should the focus not be on primary vaccination of the global community, especially in Africa, where only a very small percentage of people have been vaccinated? Should India not be focused on distributing vaccines globally than administering booster doses, especially when there is no evidence of benefit? See, there is enough evidence to say that primary immunization prevents severe disease, hospitalization, and death. That should be the core focus, no matter which part of the world or where people are living in. Ensuring vaccine availability in different parts of the world should be the priority of all countries. Of course, during a pandemic, countries would want to prioritize their own population first and then save vaccines. I believe that not India. Now, India can ensure primary immunization for the adult population and it has more vaccines. So, India's priority should be to revive the vaccine Maitri initiative in an accelerated and sustained manner. This becomes especially important as new variants are emerging, most likely from settings where there is no low vaccination pro coverage. Even if new variants are not emerging from such settings, their impact would be far more in those settings. So, if the world wants to halt the pandemic, countries need to vaccinate their own populations but also share vaccines with the rest of the world before considering booster doses. And even when evidence on booster doses emerges, there is far greater evidence on the benefit of primary immunization, and that points to the importance of sharing vaccines. India should definitely share its vaccines, and now is the time. Okay, next we are going for another article. It is a data point about the consumers' negative perception on prices remain high as COVID-19 related restrictions in most states have gradually been withdrawn and economic activity has increased. Consumers' perception of the economic situation improved slightly in November 2021 compared to the previous month, according to the latest round of the RBS Consumer Confidence Survey in urban areas. The marginal improvement in perception was mainly due to more optimism about employment opportunities and so to some extent about income levels. However, 70% of them continue to be pessimistic about the economy. The consumers' negative perception about prices of commodities reached a 3-year high. Perception about the economy. The graph shows the share of respondents were percentage wise who said that the general economy situation worsened in November 2021 compared to the same month in 2020. While the negative perception has reduced consistently over the last 3 cycles, 70.8% of the respondents were still pessimistic about the economy in November. Perception about income and price levels. The graph shows that the share of respondents percentage-wise who said that the price levels of commodities had increased and income levels had decreased in November 2021 compared to the November 2020. In the November 2021, around around 95.4% of the respondents said the price of commodities had increased, and the highest in at least the last 3 years. While the negative perception about income levels decreased from the September 2021 and cycle, it remained high compared to the pre-pandemic levels. Future perception over 3 months of the 3/4 of the respondents said price level will continue to increase 1 year from now compared to the levels of November 2021. On the other hand, most of them said they were optimistic about the general economic situation, employment opportunities, and income levels in November 2022, while 33% said the employment scenario will worsen. Only 11% said income levels will fall 1 year from now. No compromising position. The danger of journalism is not journalists meet political actors. We'll go for that as well and see whether it's going to affect you or not. Okay, stop, brace up. Okay, bhaiya. Not a compromising position. The danger of journalism is not that journalists meet political actors, it is that they don't meet them enough. A recent meeting of Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh Chief Mohan Bhagwat with a, actually I would like to go to the frontline page. Okay, go for that. Frontline, the Hindu. Okay, world affairs. Will because this is such an important topic, and most of the persons are not considering world affairs. World affairs is important as far as the global troters are concerned. It means we are basically world population rather than Indian population. India is doing us, but without world, India is nothing. So world is inclusion, inclusive development. We have to think about inclusivity. So in that sense, I have to know more about only know more about the world as well. So here about China particularly, it is affecting our country as well. We have to know about the more about this country. A Communist Party of China puts Xi Jinping on a pedestal at the Central Committee's sixth plenary session. Chinese President Xi Jinping delivering a speech at the sixth plenary session of the 19th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China in Beijing on November 11, and the resolution the CPC Central Committee adopted after its sixth plenary session formally places Xi Jinping on the same pedestal as Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping, and focuses on the country's progress during Xi 9 years in power. Okay, while lauding the contributions of Mao and Deng in overcoming the challenges the country faced during their time of the helm, okay, now go for it. In the second week of November, the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China held its sixth plenary session with the participation of 370 full and alternative members. Its main task was to reassess the role of the party in its centenary year and prepare the ground for formal elevation of President Xi Jinping to the status enjoyed by past leaders such as Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, who played key roles in the transformation of the country. The communique issued after the meeting said that China, under the leadership of Xi, had made historic achievements and undergone historic transformation. while lauding the contributions of Mao and Deng in overcoming the challenges the country faced during their time at the helm. The statement said that it was under chairmancy that the country had witnessed the tremendous transformation from standing up and growing prosperous to becoming strong. It also mentioned the changes instituted in Hong Kong after the mass protests in 2019. It also said that since its founding in 1921, the CPC had remained true to its original aspiration and mission of seeking happiness for the Chinese people and rejuvenation for the okay mentioned that since also said that since its founding in 1921, the CPC had remained true to its original aspiration and mission of seeking happiness for the Chinese people and rejuvenation for the Chinese nation, staying committed to communist ideals and socialist convictions. The meeting is a prelude to the party congress to held in 2022. The Congress is expected to formally approve the candidature of General Secretary Xi for a third five-year term. He will then become the first leader after Chairman Mao to be at the helm of affairs for more than two consecutive terms. In 2018, the Communist Party removed the two-term limit that had been in place since the mid 1970s. The Communist Press sees efforts to remodel the economy, eradicate corruption, tackle pollution, and reduce poverty. The plenum hails his handling of foreign affairs. China has broken new ground in its diplomatic endeavors amid profound global changes and turned crises into opportunities. These efforts have resulted in a marked increase in China's international influence, appeal, and power to shape. The communique said China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative (BRI), despite opposition from the United States and its allies, has been a great success. Almost all Asian countries have joined the BRI, barring notable exceptions such as India. The BRI now extends all the way to Latin America, which the US considered its backyard not so long ago. That party was also full of praise for Xi's handling of cultural and ideological issues. The communique called upon the entire party, the military, and all Chinese people to rally more closely around the central committee with Comrade Xi Jinping as its core and fully implement Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. China celebrates the 100th anniversary of the founding of Communist Party of China. A stated comrade, Xi Jinping has many profound thoughts and assessments about a series of scientific theories and their implementation, and raised a series of original and new concepts and strategies on governing the nation. He is the more author of Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics in new era. The statement said that his thoughts embodied the best of 21st century Marxist-Leninist theory and Chinese cultural ethos. For the last couple of years, he has routinely been referred to as the core and the pole leader of the country who was instrumental in overcoming the threat posed by the pandemic and other serious challenges, especially those that have come from the West in recent years. He has his key role in reducing corruption, cutting poverty, and advancing the country's technological capabilities were highlighted in recently published 532-page brief history of the CPC. The Central Committee statement emphasized that Xi showed enormous courage and strong responsibility in overcoming challenges both internationally and domestically, and acknowledged that the external environment had grown increasingly complex over the past year. While China faced extremely arduous tasks in COVID-19 prevention and control as well as economic and social development at home, the delegates did not wear face masks, a clear sign that the pandemic no longer poses a serious threat to the country. Economic slowdown. Under the impact of the pandemic, global inflation, and domestic power shortages, China's economy grew lower than 5% in the third quarter, much below the 8% growth the country had been recording for the past 2 decades. The property market is facing a crisis, with one of the country's biggest property firms, Evergrande, seemingly on the verge of bankruptcy. Despite achieving their laudable goal of eliminating absolute poverty in the country, the gap between the rich and the poor in China is still huge. The country today has more dollar billionaires than the US. At the same time, recent statistics have revealed that 600 million Chinese are not in position to afford to buy their own property in major cities. This year, the government moved against big Chinese companies such as Alibaba and Tencent to cut their monopolistic tendencies. The CPC has characterized the activities to some big Chinese business houses as going against Xi's stated goal of promoting common prosperity. Why China's prosperity cash isn't a Lehman brother movement, and that is also the article which I should read. The plenum supported the report by the CPC Political Bureau that she presented and breaking from the past adopted a resolution on the major achievements and historical experience of the party over the past century. Resolutions of such importance were adopted only on two previous occasions. The first was in 1945 under the leadership of Mao. In the decade before that, the party was afflicted with serious infighting. After 1945, Mao emerged as the undisputed leader of the CP. The second time was in 1981. Mao emerged as the undisputed leader of the CPC. The second time was in 1981. Mao emerged as the undisputed leader of the CPC. The second time was in 1981. Mao, after Deng took control of the party had at the time decided to open a new chapter of the serious economic, political and social problems resulting from the Mao-inspired Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution from 1966 onwards. The year 1981 also marked the opening of the country to foreign capital and capitalistic restructuring. Deng and the CPs had, however, emphasized that Mao Zedong thought continued to be the guiding ideology of the party, saying that Mao's contribution to the revolution far outweighs mistakes. The resolution formally placed Xi on the same pedestal as Mao and Deng and mostly focuses on the great progress the country has made during Xi's 9 years in power and his vision for the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. By 2049, when the People's Republic will celebrate its centenary, this reflects the common will of the party, the armed forces, and the Chinese people of all ethnic groups, and is of decisive significance to advance the cause of the party and the country in the new era and for driving forward the historic process of for national rejuvenation, the document said. The plenum was told that the party, through its historic experience, also prioritized the needs of the people and advanced innovation while maintaining global vision. At the same time, the party reiterated that it was committed to self-reform. It said that it was always committed to a unified and harmonious front, despite the fact that divergent views existed among its 994 million members. It is believed that some of the party want the leadership to be more accommodative to some of the demands from the US, while many countries would like the government to adopt a tougher stance against that country and opt for complete national self-reliance. Either way, the US is determined to do its utmost to ensure that resurgent China's wings are clipped at the earliest. General Mark Milley, chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, said recently that if you don't do something to change it, China will soon surpass the U.S. and Russia in military power. The CPC's third historical resolution, approved by the sixth plenum, outlined the following plans. The party has set the goals for the strengthening of the army for the new era, including the goal to realize the 100th anniversary of its army in 2027, the modernization of the national defense and the army by 2035, and the goal to build a world-class army by the middle of the century. It will carry out struggles involving Hong Kong, Taiwan, Xinjiang, Tibet, and South China Sea, and speed up the building of a maritime power to effectively safeguard national security. The resolution also added that resolving Taiwan's problems and realizing Chinese unification was the CPC's historical mission and necessary condition for the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. The resolution makes it clear that China has no intention to replace the US as the world's next hegemon. Its focus is on achieving superpower status through trade and other peaceful economic reforms. Economic means the BRI is an illustration of this resolve. The US factor. The text of the resolution the Central Committee approved on November 11 was only released after the virtual 3.5 hour long meeting between President Xi and the US President Joseph Biden on November 16. It was the first time on one-on-one meeting, though it was a virtual one, and the idea behind it was to de-escalate the growing tension between the two countries. The Biden administration has been upping the ante on the Taiwan issue since he took office. Make of the discussions between the two leaders, according to reports centered on the Taiwan issue. Speaking after the Biden summit, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that the U.S. remained committed to its one China policy and quoted from joint statements issued by both the countries on the subject since the normalization of relations in the 1970s. At the same time, Sullivan stated that the US was against any effort to save Taiwan's future by anything other than peaceful means. The summit discussions, he said, were aimed at avoiding any destabilizing actions by either side, no, to manage risk and ensure that competition does not veer into conflict. The US side brought up the usual litany of charges against China, ranging from alleged human rights abuses to denial of freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. China responded by blaming the US for imposing economic sanctions, advocating high tech decoupling between the two countries, and forging military alliances as the Quad and AUKUS to confront China. China accused the Biden administration of using the Taiwan issue to isolate China and interfere in its internal affairs. According to reports, he told Biden during the summit that China would take drastic action only if provoked, but the mainland was patient and sincere about seeking peaceful reunification with Taiwan. The recent CPC resolution said that the timing and the momentum for national reunification was entirely on the side of the mainland. Okay, now is about cover story about grand cover up. The Narendra Modi government celebrations on 1 billion COVID vaccine doses, and people wearing face masks featuring Prime Minister Narendra Modi to celebrate the completion of 1 billion vaccine doses in Ahmedabad on October 24. Now, the Modi government's gloating over administering 1 billion cumulative doses on the COVID vaccine is designed to erase from public memory its monumental failures in tackling the second wave and ensuring a free, universal, equitable vaccination with oversight and better preparedness. Administering over 1 billion cumulative doses of COVID-19 vaccine within 9 months since the COVID vaccination campaign began in January 16 is no mean achievement in the country with a population of 1.38 billion and diverse logistical difficulties. While it should make every citizen proud, the extravagant celebration in the wake of reaching that landmark figure on October 21 was grossly misplaced and unwarranted. Given the manner in which the government went about it, the attempt obviously was to use the occasion to launch a blitz campaign that would help to whitewash its monumental failures in the management of COVID 19 in the last 20 months, in particular the vaccination campaign. As on date, India has reported around 34.2 million confirmed cases, which is next only to the number in the United States, the nearly 0.46 million reported COVID related deaths. Many analysts believe is a gross underestimation. The actual number, according to recent Canadian study, is 6 to 7 times the official figure. Who, if not the government under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, whose praise the ruling party members are singing today, should be held responsible, should answerable to all those thousands of families who lost their loved ones during the second wave of COVID, March to June, because of oxygen shortage and lack of intensive care unit ICU beds. These shortages were the result of the government's lack of foresight and preparedness. In the script's history, Modi tweeted on the day of the milestone, "We are witnessing the triumph of Indian science, enterprise, and collective spirit of 130 crore Indians." There was also the op-ed page article in several dailies, ostensibly penned by Modi himself, and the Prime Minister's 10th address to the nation during the COVID-19 pandemic, with the misplaced emphasis on the Made in India, Make in India slogan. In none of his utterances, tweets, or writings did Modi pause to refer to those unfortunate events that could have been avoided. Yes, the second wave was perhaps inevitable with the highly transmissible Delta variant spreading all over the country, but with better planning and upgrading of the existing health infrastructure and human resources, many of these deaths could have been avoided. No one but the government is to be blamed for this unforgettable countrywide tragedy that unfolded in the wake of the second wave. Covishield, the Indian brand name of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine developed by British scientists and manufactured and packaged in India under the license by the Serum Institute of India, constitutes nearly 88% of the vaccine doses distributed and administered in India. Covaxin accounts for the remaining 12%. To boast about the triumph of Indian science is a gross overstatement in this context. Yes, the SIA needs to be applauded for its entrepreneurship in being the first to secure license and the contract to manufacture the vaccine in India. Without that effort, India's toll would have been far higher. We'll return later to the problems with the development of the production of the ingenious Covaxin, which is indigenous Covaxin, which is yet to obtain the emergency use approval (EUA) from the World Health Organization, even 9 months after its approval by the Indian regulators, the Central Drugs and Standard Control Organization, and the Drugs Controller General of India. Not content with the Prime Minister's own celebratory and self-congratulatory words, the government's publicity cell worked more like an event management company rather than the public information arm of the administration that it is. Huge billboards and hoardings across many cities carried large images of Modi with "Thank you Modi ji" displayed prominently on them. Leaders and followers of the Bharatiya Janata Party of various hues, including Union Minister of Power R.K. Singh, claimed wrongly on social media, Twitter in particular, that India was the first country in the world to achieve vaccine coverage of 1 billion and hailed Modi ji for this stellar achievement. China achieved a total coverage of over 2.2 billion on the day when India reached 1 billion doses. More significantly, with a vaccination rate of over 10 million doses a day on a consistent basis, China has fully vaccinated nearly 80% of its population, whereas India has fully vaccinated only about 21.5% of its population as on date. The Minister of Health and Family Welfare released a vaccine anthem, a 3-minute song by the singer Kailash Kher, along with audio-visual as part of the day celebration. The Archaeological Survey of India illuminated 1,000 monuments across the country, including the Red Fort, the Khajuraho Complex, the Konark Sun Temple, and the Qutub Minar. Ships anchored in different ports of the country were made to hoot at a specified time, and fully vaccinated people were given free ropeway rides in Gujarat, Kerala, and Uttarakhand. The fact that all this fanfare centered on Modi was orchestrated with an eye on the forthcoming assembly election in Uttar Pradesh should not be lost on anyone, especially when vaccine allocation to the states in July was remarkably skewed in favor of Uttar Pradesh. The largest allocation of both Covishield and Covaxin was made to Uttar Pradesh, which in turn has resulted today in the highest dose of administration there among all the states. But more pertinently, this excessive bragging by the government detracts from the fact that though nearly 3/4 of the adult population has received at least one dose, only a little now over 1/3 has received both doses of the vaccine. In early May, former Union Minister Prakash Javadekar stated that the government had drawn up a blueprint for administering about 1.88 million cumulative doses by the end of the year. The milestone figure of the 1 billion doses is thus only a little over half of the government's own target for the year end. This means a mammoth task lies ahead in the forthcoming 2 months. As we shall discuss later, in all likelihood, many millions will get fully vaccinated only by mid-2022. Vaccination trends, peaks and troughs. Figure 2 shows the vaccination trend since the campaign began till date. The peaks in April, in June, the week ending in June, June 25, and then in September, the week ending September 17 can be seen during the peaking week in September. Then the week ending September 17 can be seen during the peaking week in April. A total of about 25 million doses were administered, giving a per day average of about 3.6 million jabs. But immediately after that, the pace dropped steadily to reach a minimum of about an average of 1.3 million shots a day in the week ending May 21. Then the pace picks up to peak again in the week ending June 25, giving a daily average of about 6 million shots, only to drop to a minimum rate of 3.5 million in the week ending July 16. The peak in the week ending on September 17 is in part artificial. According to reliable sources, the daily vaccination rate was deliberately suppressed for some days before September 17, which was Prime Minister Modi's 71st birthday, so that the milestone figure of recording 2 crore 20 million vaccinations on that day could be announced with the fanfare and celebration. This was duly done. The rate fell immediately after to touch a minimum of about 4.5 million doses a day during the week of October 9 to 15 and then again increased slowly. Interestingly, during the week when cumulative vaccine doses administered touched the milestone figure of 1 billion doses, the average daily rate was only 5.3 million. In fact, in October per day average was only 5.5 million jabs. Had there been no peaks and valleys in the trend, and had there been a consistently increasing trend in the daily vaccination rate, the milestone of 1 billion could have been reached a few months earlier, say by August, and the drive would probably have been on course to fully vaccinate the nation by the year. And unless the production is greatly ramped up and the pace of coverage is increased significantly from the rate of around 16 million doses a day in October end, and the gap between total vaccination and the target for the year end will only grow bigger and bigger. Mismatch between targets of vaccination coverage and availability has been a constant characteristic of the Indian COVID-19 vaccination campaign. The waxing and waning of the vaccination trend reflect irregular vaccine production and discrimination in doses applied to the different states. Many states face an acute shortage of vaccine supply in May. In April, the combined production capacity of the two vaccines produced in India was only about 2.5 million doses a day. It was projected to increase to about 3.8 million by May, even if this had been attained, which however did not happen even until July, and the available doses would have been less than what would be required at the peak average rate reached in April. By exacerbating the mismatch, the government on May 1 limited its centralized procurement to only half of the vaccine doses produced in the country and asked the states and private hospitals to procure the remaining off directly from the market. Most states lacked funds for direct procurement. The center's obligation of its responsibility of providing vaccine to all was only increasing the already existing disparities in allocation and distribution of vaccines among states. This also contributed significantly to the shortfall of overall coverage. Fortunately, the center realized its mistakes soon enough, and on June 21st returned to centralized procurement of the entire production. In early August, the government told Parliament that the total production capacity of Covishield was expected to increase from 110 million doses a month to over 120 million doses a month, and that of Covaxin from 25 million to 58 million doses a month. In September, the SIS claimed that it would be able to supply 220 million doses of Covishield to the government. In October, it is not yet clear if the projections for Covaxin have been achieved. Bad planning. The failure to scale up production to meet the increasing demand happened primarily because of the issue of intellectual property rights on the vaccines and exclusive production licenses for Covishield and in the indigenous Covaxin held by SSS and Bharat Biotech India Limited respectively, while the rights for Covishield production would have been dictated by the British-Swedish multinational AstraZeneca. The grant of exclusive manufacturing rights for Covaxin to BBIL until July defied logic. Covaxin was developed by the Indian Council for the Medical Research, an arm of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and the rights for Covaxin are equally shared by the government and BBIL. Given the scale of the pandemic, BBIL's own manufacturing capacities would have been ramped up right from the start with direct funding from the center, and the production should have been augmented by licensing states, central, public sector, and enterprises (PSEs) with idle capacities to meet the inevitable surge in demand. The wisdom seems to have dawned on the Modi's government only as late as August, when it stated that to augment the domestic COVID vaccine production capacity, the government had extended support to BBIL and enabled technology transfer and license for manufacture to 3 PSEs, 1 state and 2 central under Mission COVID Suraksha. But these 3 units are yet to start production. At the start of the phased vaccination campaign on January 16, the target set for phase 1 was for the priority groups of healthcare workers and frontline workers. Even now, however, the substantial number in both the groups are yet to receive the second shot, even after 9 months of the vaccination drive as of October 20. While 10.3 million SCWs had received their first dose, only 9.1 million had received both doses, a shortfall of 1.2 million. On March 1st, the campaign included the most vulnerable groups, people aged 60 and above, and those above 45 with comorbidities. However, given the surge of the second wave and its devastating impact on April 1st, vaccination was thrown open to everyone above 45. According to official vaccination data, as of October 20, of the estimated 210 million of the 45 to 59 age group, 169 million have got their first dose, and only 87.6 million are fully inoculated. In the most vulnerable group of 60 years and above, of the estimated 143 million, 106 million have had their first shot, but only 62 million have received the second jab as well. Clearly, there are significant shortfalls in both the groups even now. In the primary aim of the vaccination drive was to minimize the risk of death from COVID, particularly in the wake of the second wave. The vulnerable group of 45 years and above should have been vaccinated fully by August. But this would be attainable only if the vaccination coverage rate of about 14 million a day, which was achieved in early April, has been maintained. But as we discussed earlier, the pace slackened, particularly owing to production shortfall. But even as the number of vaccinated people above 45 was falling below the target, the government on May 1st, apparently under pressure from some states and other quarters, widened the vaccination coverage to include everyone above 18. Initially, this far less vulnerable 18 to 44 group could get vaccinated only upon payment from the 50% doses that the state governments and the private hospitals would procure from the open market. However, from the June 21, after the government went back to centralized procurement of all vaccine doses, the 18 to 44 age group had access to free vaccination at government centers as well. The move to expand vaccination coverage to everyone aged 18 and above drew criticism from public health experts who argued that the global vaccinating all the people above 45 should have been achieved first in a situation where vaccines were in short supply. As we have seen, the more vulnerable above 45 group still remains to be fully vaccinated. Some positives. A couple of positives have occurred. However, during the ongoing campaign, vaccination among the rural population had lagged significantly behind the urban in the beginning, but in recent months, the rural population has emerged as the dominant fraction among the vaccinated, accounting for nearly 75% of the coverage. Similarly, the gender drive was quite significant early in the campaign, but now male and female fractions are almost equal. Women are only marginally behind the men by about 13 million. As on date, men account for 546 million and women for 510 million doses. As we saw earlier, fully vaccinated with the 2 doses, the total adult population requires the administration of 1.88 billion doses. A coverage of nearly 1.06 billion was achieved on October 30, showing an increase of 6 million in 10 days after the milestone of 1 billion reached on October 21st. The campaign is still to administer 820 million doses in the following 2 months. That is 410 million doses per month. This translates to about 14 million doses a day if the goal of fully vaccinating the entire adult population by the year end is to be achieved. Now, this would seem possible to achieve given the average rate of vaccination at 6 million doses a day towards October, and the current rate suggests that as many as about 125 million doses will remain unvaccinated in January 2022. It is pertinent to also note that given the recommended inter-dose gap of 12 to 16 weeks, people who get their first dose of Covishield in early November will have to wait at least until February 2022 for their second dose. Those who get their first jab in December will have to wait until March to April 2022. The time frame can be reduced if either the rate picks up significantly above the current 6 million mark, or if the entered dose gap is shortened. This should be done only if the underlying science warrants it. The above discussion, of course, assumes that adequate vaccine doses will be available over the next 2 months, but that does not seem to be the case, as the current production capacity of Covishield is only about half of what is required per month to meet the target. Covaxin's production capacity still appears to be stagnant at around 25 million doses a month. The uptake of Russian Sputnik 5, the other vaccine approved by the CDSCO, has so far been only about 1 million doses. The other potential vaccine candidates of Zydus, Cedilia, and BioE are yet to get the CDSCO GCGI nod and go into production, apparent surplus. Interestingly, however, even though the numbers indicate that there should be a shortage of vaccines, even with the current significantly increased rate of production of Covishield, nearly 127.4 million doses remain unutilized with the states and union territories, according to the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare data from the days of acute shortage in April and May. Today there seems to be surplus, but this surplus is only an apparent one given the country's demography, and there is an unmet demand in principle. So why is there no uptake of these unutilized doses? The bottleneck would seem to be an aspect of the campaign itself, which is preventing the coverage from being upped from the current rate. Is it the lack of human resources, or is it a delivery chain problem? Is it a vaccine hesitancy among the population, the effect of waning COVID-19 incidents, or is it a problem with the management of the vaccination campaign itself? Only the health ministry can possibly answer. Okay, now we'll go for another thing, but you have to stop it within 10 minutes, and now it's 15 minutes. Video is over completed, and after 10 minutes I will stop it and I will get into some food. I will eat some food and then I will come back here. We'll go for the nation. See what are the articles here. Savarkar did very little for India's independence, and Mahind Mishra, the man whom history forgets, guest artist, controversy around Tamil film Jai Bhim. Okay. Uh, okay, we'll go for international articles, world affairs. See. Okay, it's very important. We have already earlier read about China, and we'll go for now for Pakistan. Okay, this is got Imran Khan's government capitulating meekly to the demands of violent extremist groups in Pakistan. TLP supporters during protests in Lahore on October 2022. Prime Minister Imran Khan's failed standoff with the army over the appointments of the ISA chief and his giving in to the demands of extremist groups have highlighted the vulnerability of his increasingly unpopular government. Recent developments have underlined the political vulnerabilities of the Pakistan government led by Imran Khan. The first was the open standoff between the government and the powerful Pakistani security establishment on the appointment of a new chief for the Inter-Services Intelligence Agency. The Prime Minister, whose closeness and indebtedness to the Pakistani military is well known, suddenly decided to question Army Chief General Qamar Bajwa's selection of new ISI chief. The army announced its nominee, Lieutenant General Nadeem Ahmad Anjum, for the post in mid-October, apparently without keeping the Prime Minister office in the top. Imran Khan, to the surprise of many, including senior members of his own party, the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf (PTI), decided to assert himself on the issue, letting it be known that it was the prerogative of the Prime Minister to select the candidate for the post. Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid, the current chief of the ISI, played a key role in propelling Imran Khan to the Prime Minister's office. He is said to be the Prime Minister's preferred candidate for the post of Army Chief when General Bajwa retires in 2022. The Prime Minister initially stated that he would decide on the appointment of the new ISI chief after interviewing three candidates put forward by the military. After a brief standoff with the military establishment, he caved in. Lieutenant General Anjum will now take office on November 20. The opposition believes that Imran Khan's actions were motivated by self-interest and not by the intention to end army's domination of the politics of the country. Imran Khan had made no effort to mobilize opposition parties to build a popular movement against the army. At the same time, the opposition parties seemed keen to undermine his political standing and were not overly critical of General Bajwa's act of overriding his authority. On many previous occasions, when the civil administration tried to interfere in the administrative affairs of the army, the result was either an outright military coup or regime change orchestrated from military headquarters. Nawaz Sharif lost his prime ministership on two occasions because of his efforts to tame the army leadership and bring it fully under political control. The first time he was the victim of an outright coup The second time, the army and its intelligence wing undermined him politically by brazenly propping up Imran Khan and his party. According to many Pakistani analysts and commentators these days, the army is trying to distance itself from the increasingly unpopular PTI-led government. Another important development that has further diminished the image of the government in the is the deal it made with the banned Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan (TLP) party in early November. The TLP has gained support in rural areas, especially in Punjab, the country's most populous province, by calling for the strict implementation of blasphemy laws. The laws are frequently used to target the Ahmadi sect and other minorities. Those accused of violating them can be sent to the gallows. The TLP has said that the sole punishment for blasphemy should be decapitation. TLP support for Tasir's assassin. The party came to prominence when it organized a huge rally in 2011 in support of Mumtaz Qadri, the assassin of Salman Tasir, the then acting government of Punjab. Qadri was the policeman assigned to protect Tisha. A Tisha's crime in the eye of the fundamentalists was his support for a Christian woman who had been jailed on alleged blasphemy charges. The mobilization capabilities of the party became evident after it paralyzed Islamabad in 2018 when Nawaz Sharif's party, the Pakistan Muslim League, and was in power. According to reports in the Pakistani media, the army facilitated the TLP's massive sit-ins in Islamabad at the time. After deal with Pakistan government, Islamist has a halt march. I can also read that. The issue then was a minor change in the wording of the oath-taking ceremony for MPs, which describes the Prophet Muhammad as God's final prophet. The government quickly reversed the changes, but the TLP had scented blood, confined that it could in future pressure other governments to do its bidding. The party also decided to contest elections after that, and is now doing better than the established Islamic parties in the country, like the Jamaati Islami. The TLP draws its support from followers of the Barelvi school of Islam. The majority of the Sunni population in the country are adherents of this school. The Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan or Pakistani Taliban was earlier critical of the TLP, but has now changed its stance and expressed its support for the TLP after a confrontation between the TLP and the Pakistani government in April of this year. The TTP said, "We stand by those who sacrificed their lives for the honor of the Prophet." Demand for action against France. In September 2020, the French magazine Charlie Hebdo republished a controversial set of cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad after a Kachin militant beheaded a teacher in France for showing one of those caricatures in a classroom in October 2020. Protests erupted in many Muslim countries demanding action against the French government. The protests led by the TLP were one of the biggest in the Islamic world. Protesters cut off the motorway connecting Islamabad and Lahore, and six police personnel lost their lives in clashes with them. The protesters demanded that Pakistani boycott French goods and that the French ambassador be expelled from the country. Imran Khan had strongly condemned the publication of the offensive cartoons. At the same time, he warned that the open diplomatic rupture with France would be detrimental to national interest, as around half of Pakistani's exports were to the European Union. The protest ended when the government promised, among other things, to discuss the possible expulsion of the ambassador in the National Assembly. In April 2021, the TLP cadre prone to violence went on the rampage in Lahore because the issue had still not been debated in the assembly. They succeeded in cutting off the Grand Trunk Road, the country's busiest highway that connects many important cities. Punjab province was almost completely paralyzed with supply lines choked and businesses shut down. Four police officers were killed at this time, and more than 114 officers died wounded. Many of the protesters were armed. The government was forced to call in paramilitary forces to quell the protests. The government proscribed the TLP, describing it as a terrorist organization, and arrested Saad Hussain Rajvi, Rizvi, its leader, and the other TLP leaders under the country's tough anti-terrorism laws. The protests were only called off after the PTI government gave an assurance that the issue of expelling the French ambassador would be put to the vote in the National Assembly, and that the imprisoned TLP leaders would be granted an amnesty. The government signed an agreement with the TLP, but the details were kept secret from the opposition. The government, however, consulted the opposition on the feasibility of putting the issue of the expulsion of the French ambassador to vote in the parliament, which in fact began debating it before better political and diplomatic sense prevailed. The government did not put the issue to the vote, and the TLP leaders continued to be incarcerated. The consensus within the political parties and the powerful military establishment was that the issue should be put on the back burner. Even more galling for the TLP leadership was the fact that their top leaders was in jail, and the ban on the party remained. In the last weeks of October, the TLP took to the streets again, announcing a long march to the capital via Lahore and Rawalpindi in another attempt to make the government bow to its demands, which included the release of its imprisoned leaders, the lifting of the ban on the party, and the expulsion of the French ambassador to the country. Prowess in organizing protests. The TLP has shown its prowess in organizing protests. This was the sixth time the party had ordered its followers to march on the capital. Again, the PTI government, which had vowed to take a tough line against the TLP, capitulated meekly, unable to control the violent protests who were hell bent on marching on the country's capital. Mufti Muni Manibur Rahman, an influential conservative cleric, brokered the latest deal between the government and the extremist Islamic grouping. While addressing the press conference flanked by some senior ministers, including Foreign Minister Shah Muhammad Qureshi, the cleric said that the new government was not a victory or defeat for any side. Talking to the media after the agreement was reached, Interior Minister Sheikh Rashid said that the Saad Rizvi was still insistent on the closure of the French embassy and that the issue should be put forward in the country's parliament. Sheikh Rashid said that the government had agreed to all the TLP demands except those pertaining to the closure of the French embassy and departure of the ambassador. Just a few days before the agreement was signed, some senior government functionaries were alleging that the TLP was being secretly supported by India's intelligence agencies. The government, in its part, agreed on once again to release the jail leadership of the TLP and lifted the ban on the party from participating in the coming elections. In the first week of November, an anti-terrorism court in Lahore granted bail to several prominent leaders of the party. The government said that all the details of the agreement would be revealed only at an appropriate time. The opposition parties have unitedly demanded details of the agreement from the government and expressed surprise at the fact that the services of an individual were used to broker a deal between the state and a banned organization. Around the same time, the Imran Khan government initiated direct face-to-face talks with the banned TTP in a bid to end the militancy of more than a decade and a half. After the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban, the TTP has continued to stage attacks inside Pakistan. The Taliban leadership in Kabul has been trying to persuade the TTP to enter into talks with Islamabad since it came to power in August. Before the talks began, the Pakistan army had launched an offensive in North Waziristan, the stronghold of the Pakistani Taliban, forcing their fighters to flee into Afghanistan. On November, ceasefire with the Pakistani Taliban. On November 8, the Pakistani government announced that it had agreed to 1 month ceasefire with the TTP. Hafid Chowdhury, the Pakistan government spokesman, admitted that the Afghan Taliban facilitated the agreement. He said that both sides had agreed to on a complete ceasefire before the agreement was signed. Government sources told the media that there were okay, now it's over. Actually, this is a lot of there is a lot, and okay, it's over, almost over. Many Pakistan are unhappy with the government's decision to negotiate with the TTP. The group has been responsible for horrific crimes, including attacks on schools and hospitals. Military bases have not been spared. Relatives of those killed in Taliban attacks have protested against the government's move to grant amnesty to Taliban fighters. Opposition parties have criticized the move, saying that they had not been consulted or informed about the secret negotiations. The Pakistan government has sought to justify its move by saying that if the United States could negotiate with the Afghan Taliban after 2 decades of war, Pakistan could also do so. Critics of the government's move point out that the US was an occupying power in Afghanistan and the Taliban was fighting to liberate the country. The Pakistani Taliban, on the other hand, they point out, has been fighting against the legitimate government of Pakistan and its terror campaigns, which have claimed the lives of thousands of innocent people or acts of sedition. The Pakistan People's Party said the government's move was akin to sprinkling salt on the wounds of martyr families and questioned why the government did not take the National Assembly into its current confidence on such sensitive issues. Interestingly, the Pakistan government, while willing to offer an olive branch to terrorist groupings, such as the TTP, responsible for widespread atrocities, treated with an iron fist a peaceful protest movement such as the Pashtun Tafsan Protection Movement. The government has spurned the PTM's repeated requests for talks. Senior ministers have said that for talks to begin, members of the PTM should follow a Pakistan agenda and not cast aspersions on the Pakistan army. Thank you.